I'm photographer David duChemin, and this is Vision is Better, a sometimes weekly podcast about the craft and art of photography. Welcome here.
Hey, welcome to episode 19 of Vision is Better. Today I want to talk to you about 5 things that I do on every photograph that I post-process. It's going to make it seem a little longer than I would normally take. I actually don't spend a lot of time in post-production, preferring to get things as right as possible in camera, but that doesn't always happen, and there are always ways that you can make things better and bring them more into line with your vision. So I'm going to talk through the vision-driven workflow. That's what I call it. You call it whatever you like. I'm not going to talk so much about specific techniques as I am about the reason I do these things, but I'll talk about the techniques as well. So we're going to look at a photograph I made in Cavendish, Prince Edward Island last year, and I'll walk you through it. Okay, this is a photograph that I made as the sun was going down on Cavendish, and the thing that drew my attention to this photograph initially was the sky. Obviously, I was there because of the color of the rock. The color of the rock in Prince Edward Island is known to be really red and vibrant. But it was the sky that I was really drawn to in this particular frame because of the way that it echoed in the surface of the pond below. And I have several frames. The better of the frames that I came up with out of this shoot were vertically oriented and gave me more of the sky and more of the puddle. But just because of the format of this video, it might be easier if I show you in terms of a horizontal image. So there are 5 things, and I'll walk you through very quickly, and then I'll show you how I do these in regards to this particular image. The first thing that I do is I identify my intent. That's the first step, and I'll explain it when I walk you through it. But always sit and identify my intent before I go any further. The next step is to minimize my distractions. Then I maximize the mood. Then I work on drawing the eye, and the last step, number 5, is working on the output of the photograph. And that may mean immediately printing it. It may just mean getting it kind of ready for other outputs, like creating a JPEG and sending it off to Instagram or to my website or something. So first thing is identify my intent. So I sit in front of the photograph, and usually I'm doing this within fairly close distance to when I actually made the photograph, and I remember the driving mood or emotion or the thing that caught my eye. So in this case, it's just simply the calm mood of it. I loved the pastel colors, so I know that I'm not going to go crazy with, this is not going to become an HDR image or anything. It doesn't need to be. Of course, I don't really do HDR anyway, but I really want to. I know that I want to draw attention to the strokes of cloud in the sky. I know that I want some of these colors to be a little punchy, and some of the geology, the features of the geology and the texture. And every time I bring up the word texture, I know that I'm going to end up using my clarity slider, because that, to me, in my own brain, I've renamed it my texture slider, and that's over here in the presence panel. It says clarity. I might use vibrance as well, although sometimes contrast can work well to sort of boost the colors without it looking sort of weird. So that's the first thing, is just sitting down and figuring it out. Some of my images, they're going to be a little bit more mood driven. Some of them, there's going to be a very specific subject that I know I want to draw attention to, but I just sit and ask myself, what do I want this image to look like? What do I want it to feel like? What kind of experience do I want people to get out of this photograph? When other people look at it, what do I want them to be drawn to? Those are the kinds of questions I'm asking myself. So that's the first thing, identify intent. The second thing is to minimize my distractions. For example, if I go to my crop tool and choose this and draw a line here across the horizon, it will straighten my image. A crooked horizon is one of the first things that's going to kind of bother me about this photograph. I might at this point recrop it. If, for example, I wanted it to be a 16 by 9, which I don't, because I know if I crop it to 16 by 9, I'm going to lose some of the impact of these strokes here, and of course the echoed mirrored strokes in the bottom. But that might be a time that I would play with alternate crops, because if I can do that early on in the process, if I can kind of get the working canvas established, I find for my own, the way that I work, that's better. It's more... it's putting the cart before the horse for me. It might not be the case with you. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at spots and ask myself, what kind of spots do I have? Now, in the case of this particular image, I've got quite a few spots. I've already dusted this image, but if you go down here and click on the Visualize Spots tool, you'll see the spots come up really clearly. The keyboard shortcut for that is A. So A back and forth will toggle that on and off. I find this a very helpful tool, and I always spot my images, because there's nothing worse than getting it up, and I've done it so many times, getting it up on my website or printing it and finding out, oh my God, look at all those spots, and you have to go back and start all over again. So I would immediately spend my time dusting the image, and you can see all of the dusting that's gone on to kind of clean this up. So that's minimize distractions. There may be other things. There may be a little piece of garbage somewhere that you need to clone out, or an alternate crop that pulls in and minimizes the distractions in another way. Crops something out that you didn't, a little branch creeping in from the side or something like that. All right. So that's minimize distraction. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that my color balance is the way I want it, because this is about maximizing mood. So I might play with a color balance and see if there's something that I like a little bit better. Color balance for me is not about accuracy, but about mood and emotion, and so I really do it sort of to taste. That's one of the first things I will do. I will also make sure that my exposure is kind of where I want it. If I feel like, it's a little dark, if your monitor is you'll see mine is at half. If your monitor is really bright, it may look deceptively, the image may look deceptively bright. So I like to sort of just make sure my monitor is at 50%. That's where my monitor calibration tool puts me, so that I know when I print this, the print is not going to be too dark. But I'm always looking at my exposure on the histogram and asking myself, do I have pure whites? If there are pure whites in the scene, there aren't. And are my blacks, are they too dark? Are they plunged? In this case, there's a little area, you can see it sort of pop up in a second. You'll see right over here, there's a little area that pops up there. All right. Now, do I care that that's out of range? Not at all. There's nothing in there I need to see, so I probably wouldn't even fuss with that. But that's part of what it means for me to maximize the mood. I will probably, because I've already identified contrast in this image, I will push the clarity just a little bit, and it just kind of bumps the texture. You go too far and it starts looking a little grungy, and you lose some of the saturation. I'm not a big fan of using clarity too much, though in the past I've certainly been guilty of it. I might push the saturation a little bit. Usually I experiment with my contrasts. This is okay, but often when I put a medium contrast tone curve on my image, I end up going back to the shadows and just kind of playing and seeing it bringing a little bit back into the shadows. And truthfully, this is what I would call an extended dynamic range kind of technique. You are pulling light back into areas that you've just taken it away from in the tone curve. But this effect, if you look at the before and after, I quite like the effect that this has. It makes the image a little bit more. It gives the texture, it gives the contrast, but it keeps the shadow detail. And to me, this is not over the top. I find this relatively subtle. All right, so let's establish mood or maximize mood. And you can do that so many ways. You can use your luminance, saturation, and hue sliders. You could use split toning if you wanted to introduce some color into the highlights or into the shadows. On this image, I'm not going to do that. But that sort of walks you very briefly through those 1, 2, 3 steps. The next I would do is drawing the eye. And I would, for this image, I would go up with the brush tool and I would paint in a little bit of, and you'll see that there's already a pin here. I've already done some of that, but paint in a little bit of exposure. My clarity shouldn't be on. My saturation I don't want on. My shadows don't need to be on. I push a little bit of exposure, a little bit of highlights, and I would do the same thing down here because light has a logic to it, and if it's a reflection, I kind of want both to be there. If there were other, I see I've missed a dust spot. If there were other clouds here that I wanted to really draw the eye to, I would do that. And then the other thing you can do, and there's some down here that I've kind of dodged and burned a little bit. You can also not only pull the eye towards things, but you can push the eye away. So, you know, if I wanted to darken up in here or vignette the corners to push the attention into the center of the image, I could do that. I could also create a new brush and zeroing everything, I could perhaps darken some of those shadows and pull the shadows down, a little bit of exposure, and just sort of darken these if I felt I wanted to draw a little bit more attention to them. The shadows in the water. I use a very feathered brush so that things don't start looking kind of weird and haloed. If I wanted to draw attention to these potholes, you could do a little darken on one side and lighten on the other, and that would give you an increased feeling of depth to them. Anything that you want to draw to the eye to, you can do a little push and pull, and I usually don't do a little push without a little pull. I don't do usually a dodge without doing a burn, again, because rather than heavily dodging something or heavily burning it, I find doing a little of both is much more believable, and you can kind of maintain that illusion. All right. So this is just a basic kind of walkthrough, and I'm trying to give you sort of the broadest possible strokes on this. Identify your intent, minimize your distractions, maximize the mood, and some of this will take time. It's easy for me to say maximize the mood. It will take time for you to figure out what that means for you. How does maximizing the mood work best for you and for your voice and for what you're trying to accomplish. And then the last thing I would do is just make sure it's ready for output. Usually I will then go and I will make sure things like this are not occurring. If I just go down to my tone curve, I will just pop this up a little bit until you'll notice now my highlight, well it did, my highlight warning or shadow warning has disappeared. I'll just make sure everything's in range so that when I print, there's no areas of pure black or pure white. That's just sort of it's a fine art convention that I think is worth honoring. And then the sharpening, I will do a little bit of sharpening, but I rarely do it without masking. And here's a tip that I really like. Right now, there's sharpening applied to everything in the image, including the little bits of spots that I missed. And I'll go back before I print and I'll touch that up. But if I hit the Option key, hold the Option key down while sliding this masking, that shows you what is being sharpened. So white is being sharpened, black is not being sharpened. So do I want everything in the image sharpened? No, I don't. Do I want all the little particular bits? Not really. What I want is just kind of enough in the details that they're crisp and sharp, and I will of course do print sharpening as a separate thing. When I do export to JPEG, I will do an export, sharpening on export for that particular JPEG that's separate from this. Of course, if there are very specific things I wanted sharpened, I could also go up and use my brush tool and apply only sharpening to a particular area. If I wanted the texture here to be even more pronounced, I could just brush in some sharpness. I don't do that as much anymore. Again, I find just getting the focus right and using a decent lens has helped. I'm also not a stickler for sharpness. I think there are things in our images that can pull our hearts and our minds with much more force and subtlety than just pure sharpness. If your image doesn't work on account of sharpness, it's not going to work when you crank up the sliders or brush sharpness in. Anyway, that's the 5 things that immediately I can think of that if you begin to incorporate into your workflow, you will find you make stronger decisions in your post-production, whether it's a landscape or a portrait or whatever. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us this week. It's been a lot of fun. These 5 videos I hope have been helpful to you. And well, hey, remember, gear's good and vision's better. We'll see you next time.